Africa.
Tech.
Innovation.
The future of business.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the second series of Inside the C-Suite. We'll be talking about how entrepreneurs are building successful businesses in East Africa. A lot of the times we hear about how, things went bad, but it's also good to hear about positive stories of companies that we identify with and brands that we identify with on how they've built these businesses. So today we are privileged to have Morne Deetlefs. He's the founder and CEO of Big Square. Morne.
Hi, guys.
Welcome, Morne. We also have Sebastian McKinlay, who's the East Africa representative of Uqalo. Welcome, Sebastian.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Seb. We also have Jason. Jason is the managing director of IDEV.
Hi, everyone. Welcome.
Thank you, Jason. So I'm going to jump straight into it and go to Morne. Morne, tell us a little bit about your background. I know you're South African. So what made you leave the beautiful country full of wine and, all these good things and come to Kenya?
You've seen Miguna, right? So, I'm South African, but I haven't lived in South Africa for, I think it's 16 years now. Left South Africa for greener pastures in Lagos, Nigeria. It's quite an exotic work and environment and country to go to. So I'll rewind a little bit and explain why I ended up in Lagos. The life of an entrepreneur is definitely not very rosy and easy. So I was born with my father's entrepreneurial red ant in my pants. I'm an accidental employee, actually, because every time I fail at business, I have to go and work. Otherwise, Talia, Shadai, and my wife can't have school fees and some food. So I end up working for someone because I've got to pay some bills. But through it all, at the age of I think it was about 30 years old, with my wife, my daughter in the car, driving off with a van with a couple of boxes to go back to my parents' house at the age of 30 because we lost our house and our cars and everything, and I had to start from scratch. It wasn't very liberating going back to your parents' place at the age of 30, as you can imagine. And your father asking you, well, Morne, let's just understand the budget for the month. After living on your own from the age of 18. Anyway, lost everything. I had to go and work for a company called Chicken Licken, which is like a KFC in South Africa. I started with just taking any job, basically, anything available, but ended up enjoying it a lot. I did the northern part of the country as a region, looking after operations. And then an opportunity came along with them to do international development. So I put up my hand and I said, look, I wouldn't mind doing that. Never having development experience, I got taught and went on a quick course on how development works, but had the operational background as a pillar to support me in terms of understanding what I'm building. So I ended up going into international markets, of which Nigeria was one. And I helped a Nigerian entrepreneur called Deji roll out Chicken Lickens and Elmo's and Butterfield, which were all three South African brands, in Lagos, and he created the first food court concept in Lagos at that point. So he then approached me and said, look, I need help to roll out more stores. Are you interested in joining me? And of course, I was, interested because I was earning a very low salary. I had a lot of debt to pay back. And he offered me something like 3 times I was earning in South African rand. The problem was, obviously, with all the stories about Nigeria, was I going to get a salary in the first place? Anyway, I took the plunge, went to Lagos, and that's how I ended up in Lagos. Is to try and make some cash to pay back all the debt to my family and the banks in South Africa. So anyway, ended up in Lagos, and then helped Inscore after that roll out in Lagos with ExxonMobil. And as you know, Inscore has got a footprint in Kenya, and they needed someone to head up their business here, and that's how I ended up in Kenya as the managing director of Inscore Kenya. And then I spent about 6 years building the business with them, and then of course the perpetual red ant was biting again. And I looked at the Kenyan market. I said to my wife, Loshni, I tell you what, I think there's a gap in the market. And she said, oh God, not again. here we go again, oh God. And I said, look, I'm going to leave this cushy job I've got at InScore. And I tell you what, on top of that, I'm going to take all my savings and let's start this business. So of course she was ecstatic about that comment. So, but anyway, off we went. And firstly, I believed in Kenya and the economy. At that point, it was really InScore and Java that were in the market. There was no one else. No one else had arrived at that point in terms of international brands. And I really believed that we could take the casual dining niche by storm if we had created a brand with my knowledge of the Kenyan and African market in general. And that's how Big Square was born. And we started our first store in Karen with some of my team is here today who started with me 6 years ago. Some of my team started with me as stewards, chefs, and they now help me run the business.
Great. Fantastic story. I think Kenya is definitely a place to love and a home to many. And Seb, you also got bitten by the Kenyan bug and left, Europe and came to Kenya. Why so?
So just briefly, my background. So I started working in private equity in London in 1995. So I joined the investment bank and at a university and joined their private equity team. I was there about 10 years. When my wife and I found out we were having our first child, I quit my job there, and we took some time off and went and traveled. I then came back to the UK and set up a firm with a few friends, a private equity firm with a few friends. We listed a company on the stock market. We got a chairman in who we thought would help us raise the money, and he did. But I had a falling out with him after about a year, and he fired me, which was a bit gutting. But hindsight actually was a great thing for me, because I then got a better job. I joined a big US financial services firm called Fidelity. So they're one of the world's largest fund managers. They manage about $2 trillion, so quite a lot of money. They're privately owned by a single family, American family, and they wanted to set up a private equity business, investing the family's money. So I joined them to do that, to invest in Western Europe and North America. We hired a team to do that. It was like 2007, so it was just a couple of years before the financial crisis. And I remember when they were interviewing me, I had to give a presentation as to what our opportunity was, and I gave a presentation which sort of put up a whole series of slides of the prices of various different asset classes, and said, do we realize we're at the top of the cycle for just about every asset class you can think of at the moment? And it's going to go down, not up from here. To which, they agreed, yes, we are, but we can ride it out. We're a private firm. We'll ride it out. Unfortunately, we didn't quite see how far it was going to go down and how black the whole world was going to look if you're sitting in London and one of the premier financial services centers. So it was a difficult time from that perspective. We rode that out. But really about 2012, I was starting to think this has been, a fabulous, whatever it is, approaching 20 years. Been a great job and a great place. But Western Europe looked like it was going to have a really tough 10 years economically. The private equity industry had gone from really what was a very entrepreneurial sector when I joined in 1995, small teams, small funds, backing owner managers, to something which was more akin to, banking or fund management. So it had been sort of transformed, and we decided to do something different, as a family, to come somewhere different. So I spent some time looking around various places. I had a very good friend from university who was Kenyan, so we'd been out here a few times. But actually first we went to South Africa. I went to meet a few private equity firms in South Africa, and all the firms I met there told me how they were trying to invest capital in the rest of Africa, outside South Africa. So I thought it'd be a bit funny to come here if everyone's here is trying to get over there. So I thought I'll come to Nairobi and go and check in with a few people. And really within just a couple of days of landing, this is the obvious place to come. It's, for people like myself, it's very welcoming, very accepting. Felt like there's a big dynamic community, local entrepreneurs, international experience. It gives us all the comforts that we are used to living in London: good healthcare, good education, good transport, obviously better weather than London. And also at that time, sort of 2012, 13, I think there was a sort of very, very optimistic outlook economically. Certainly all the CEOs I spoke to said, we have had a fabulous 10 years. I think it's been a tighter 5 years since then. So I probably came 10 years too late, as ever. But certainly it's not a decision we've ever regretted for a single minute. We settled in within a couple of days and I really enjoyed it. Professionally, there's lots of opportunity here. And obviously being a human being living in Nairobi, it's, you have the privileges that we're lucky to have as well. It's a great place to be.
Thank you, Seb. And your journey with Uqalo is also quite interesting. You've done quite some, good investments in East Africa. Maybe if you could just, speak, slightly to what that has been and how that experience has been.
Yeah, sure. So when I first came here, I went and saw, again, a number of private equity firms, and everyone said, yeah, we're definitely looking to hire people. We need someone who's got a network and generate deals. I knew no one. So, it was the second meeting of the day, and they were the second person I knew. So I knew no one. So I thought I better get a job where I can actually build a network quite quickly. So I was fortunate enough, actually, when I was back in London, I opened the FT one day, and there was an advert for a job at KPMG in Nairobi. Called, spoke to them, sent in my CV. Didn't hear from them, flew out, came to see them, said, I'm in town, can I come and see you? And they offered me a job. So I was in KPMG helping raise money for companies in agribusiness and renewable energy across sub-Saharan Africa. So I did that for 2 years, and it was great. Got in to see about 150 companies, got in to see lots of investors, and start to get some understanding of the differences of doing business here to the market I knew well. So after I'd been there 2 years, so my contract expired. So I left there and I thought, I'll just do some angel investing. I'll knock around town and I'll see what happens. I got introduced by common contact into a guy called Giles Heffer, who is now effectively my boss. We all have them, Winnie. We bear them. So I bumped into Giles. Giles had spent the last 30 years working for a Hong Kong Chinese family called the Fungs, two brothers, William and Victor Fung. The Fungs control listed business called Lin Fung, which manages supply chains for the largest clothing retailers in the world. So they do about $20 billion in revenue, but they did no business in Africa, no business to talk of in Africa. And a couple of years ago, they said to Giles, we should understand Africa better. Maybe in 10 years, maybe in 20 years, we'll be doing business there. Our children will be doing business there. So can you invest in capital there as a good way to get to know the market better? So that's what Giles is looking to do, and that's what I'm helping them do here.
Jason, you're the bridge between Morne and Seb. So where did you find these two characters?
Referee. There's lots of
matchmaker. Exactly.
Well, actually, I think they had actually met before I came in, and then there was a second round, and Morne in the beginning was like, I don't know.
When I met Seb, I said I need help.
Yeah. No, so it's been very interesting from that very first meeting that I was a part of when we met in the AdLife big square, and that was the first meeting I believe that Morne met Giles as well. All the way through the process, there were many investors that were interested at different stages and just seeing the process go through. I do have to admit, the deal took, 16 months total from when we first started. It was probably the longest deal in about 20 years in the sector that I've been a part of, or one of them. And that's some complex M&A transactions as well. So we can jump into that as we go through some lessons learned on, I think, everyone's front there. But it's been an interesting journey, and it's been, fun working with you guys. Through ups and downs and battles and trying to also keep in mind that, as contentious as sometimes the negotiations get, and Alex, you were there at some of the more contentious ones in your office, as contentious as those negotiations get, at the end of the day, you guys now have to sit here next to each other, like each other, and work together for the next 5 to 7 years and trust each other. So that's an interesting kind of dynamic and challenge that is always fun to experience and be a part of.
I think that's definitely the dynamic when it comes to doing a deal. So talking about the deal, how did it come together? Jason?
How did it come together? I think there were, as I was saying, jumped in, sat down with Morne and his partners, Nathan and Joram. They had tried to raise capital in the past and did not like the valuations and the numbers that they were getting at all. And then we actually we're the sole lead advisor on the Twiga transaction, the Twiga seed round, which Seb was actually a part of and is now chairman of the board of Twiga. And, Peter and Jonjo, who's one of the co-founders of Twiga, had made an introduction to Nathan, who's one of Morne's co-founders, who was actually Peter's boss at Coca-Cola. And then said, hey, you guys shouldn't be going through this alone. Bring in IDEV or someone to help you guys out to get through the process. And that's where we kicked off. It was really interesting from the very first meeting to kind of get an understanding of the concept, and not necessarily the concept of where Big Square was at the time. We actually heard from one investor who, I won't name names, but they said, oh, we turned that deal down. After they looked at it, they said, we turned that deal down because it was a workout. It was a turnaround, which was a surprise for me. But maybe it was because the deal took so long to see the concept that Morne had in mind. When I went and looked at the AdLife location, it was the first they had done a full rebranding, a full repositioning, and less around fast food and more around family casual dining. And the first branch that did that was AdLife. They didn't have the Wilson store up yet. They didn't have the Bellevue store up yet. So they had a couple of older stores that they didn't have money to invest in, kind of rebranding and redesigning. So it took a little bit of buying into that vision, which is something that I think, Seb and Giles got pretty quickly. You guys jumped on that right away, and I think that's where the alignment was right off the bat. I don't know, Seb, if you want to comment on that and how you guys looked at it from the beginning as well.
Yeah, I mean, we Giles and I met with you, Morne, didn't we? We sat in the AdLife shop, and you ordered everything on the menu.
You guys ate none of it.
No. They looked hungry.
And to be actually honest, we came out that meeting, and Giles was like, I don't know, it's okay. I don't know. I think, we definitely like the concept, as in, but I think there was some uncertainty whether it worked as a deal. But yes, as the concept, as in, one of the things we first look for in businesses are, businesses where the clients just love it. And you mentioned Twiga, it's the same. When we spent a day out in the field with them, whenever it was, 2015 or something, you go around and see their customers, the customers just love it. And it's the same, you could see it in Big Square as well, and even more so in the stores they've opened since then. It brings, Morne will talk some more about this, about what he's trying to deliver the customer, but I think it gives people an experience here, which is a really enjoyable experience at a very affordable price. And, that in its essence is, without that, you're not going to be able to build a business. So we definitely sort of bought into that, and that was, probably the first step of saying, we should look at this closer.
Morne, when you were busy ordering all the food in the menu, what was going through your mind at that time?
I just needed the cash.
Badly.
Awesome.
So, no, it was interesting. I think what you're not prepared for is the questions you get asked about your own business. They ask some questions that you don't think about on a day-to-day basis. And then they ask you a question, you sit back and you think, actually, I don't know. Which was an eye-opener, and I was just honest during the discussion. It was just a meet and greet at that time, so we didn't get into too much details. I guess it was just to meet.
We all know how those first meetings go with investors. They say they're interested, and then they take forever to come back to you, sign an NDA, you get into processes, they ask you a lot of questions, and they still leave you hanging. What gave you comfort to know that, you could work with Seb, and that really you could, see this to fruition?
Well, I think the process didn't work that way, to be honest. We met Seb and Giles actually before we employed IDEV. So we met them, and then they kind of disappeared for a while, because as you heard, Giles wasn't that impressed at first glance. So, but we were wanting to raise funds anyway for us to execute the vision we had for the brand. My co-founder Nathan and my other partner Joram, have had a lot of confidence in the team and the business, and they had invested quite heavily into the business on a personal level. But, we were very aware of the fact that to take it to the next level, we would need more institutional or more structured funding. We also, fundraising is definitely not my expertise. Neither was it any of my partners' expertise. And we didn't even know where to start, to be honest. I mean, where do we even go and meet investors? Go to the investor show. I don't know. So
The EAVCA conference.
Yes.
Yeah. So, that's when my partner Nathan then mentioned that he was introduced to Jason, and that's how we actually met. We knew from the start that we would need help with the transaction, taking us through, helping us understand the process, and also someone who bets for us, right? That's how we actually ended up engaging IDEV.
Sounds like Jason had some secret sauce. So, Jason, how did you convince Seb to come on board? What did you do that made the difference?
I think it was the barbecue sauce. I think it was the ribs, and May's favorite, the milkshakes, and it was the business, to be honest. I mean, we went out and spoke to a lot of investors. Morne's a pro now at talking to investors, and there was a lot of interest. And this was, by the way, the exact same time that Java was being actively bid on by everyone, in the market, and a number of large funds outside of the market, as well as a number of other major players in the sector. So, I mean, we were sitting in meetings where funds were saying, and we were originally looking for $10 million, was the original raise amount. And we were in meetings with funds saying, are you sure you don't want 20? Think about what you could do if we gave you 20, because they were having conversations with Java and thinking at that level. And there's kind of a gap in the market. There's kind of, for the larger PE funds, they want to deploy 10 to 15 million. And that's kind of one of the reasons why we ended up at the 10 million mark. And then you're kind of in a space with a lot fewer investors if you're below 10 million. So it was a catch-22 that we ran into. But, there was lots of investor interest. I really think it was the business itself. During that time, AdLife was doing very well. Garden City was gaining traction. Then Wilson came in and just knocked it out of the park. And then Bellevue came in and did well. So I think the business over the course of the transaction held up. And this is during a period of the election season in Kenya. That was a nightmare. Seb, I don't know on your end, as you were kind of watching things from the outside and looking at the dashboard of numbers, what you guys were thinking.
I think actually, we formed a view. Whilst Charles was reticent, I think it wasn't so much about the business. It was just we haven't done anything restaurants, and is that where we want one of our first investments to be in a sector we're not too familiar with. But I think our approach was quite quickly to try and get comfortable with the economics of an individual restaurant. So your point, Jason, about people looked at it and thought it's a turnaround or something like that. Actually, what we understand is, yes, does the customer love the offering, and then can you make money at a restaurant level? And what sort of return on capital particularly can you make? So how much does it cost to put a restaurant in, and then what's the payback on that? And if the return on that capital is significantly higher than the returns we're looking for, we think if we can repeat this and scale it, then it'll turn out to be a good transaction. I think we came to that view fairly early. I think we then gave a price which made these guys vomit, and then they went away and spoke to everyone else.
I think the difference in valuation on our end and your end was more than 3 times the valuation
I think the other challenge was we could only do $4 or $5 million, and as you say, you're looking for more. So I think to an extent, to be honest, it took a long time because you were looking for someone other than us for a lot of it. Someone who could offer more money or a better price. But we sort of hung in there. And I think we stuck to our guns, and when we said our price, we meant our price. We weren't trying to play games, and we said how much we could invest. We meant that as well. So I think there was a sort of approach we took around it. At some point, we did start to apply a bit more pressure, as in you guys need now to make a decision. So we can only sit here and wait so long, and the investment committee can only look at big square on the pipeline list for so long before they get bored. So we did start to apply some pressure, and I think that at the same time, obviously, Morne did want to get the money raised. I mean, in a good way, as he wanted to. Let's move on and get this done. I'm going to ask you a question, Morne. Just your perspective on when you look at the times you just had Nathan and John as investors, who I'd say have made an enormous commitment to the business in terms of dollars and cents and time and a lot of support from Morne. But how do you assess the sort of life of an entrepreneur where you've got two private investors, and did you start to raise money from a fund at the right time? Should you have done it earlier? What are your thoughts around that?
I think it's about alignment. I think Joram, Nathan, and myself had obviously discussed this at length at various times of the business, and we had to make a decision whether we wanted to be a 5-restaurant outfit, which was then fine, and we would, grow the business, grow it organically, and you can do it slowly, open one restaurant one every 2 years using internal cash flow, which is fine because then we didn't have to listen to anyone else. We could do what we like, right? We didn't need other investors and other directors on the board and people asking questions. And so you're either happy doing that or you have to look at the business. And I think putting the business first all the time is most probably what we were good at. So once we settled the concept and we had a vision for where we wanted to take Big Square, we very, very quickly realized that we were not going to be able to do it on our own. And once we made that decision, it made everything else easier. And the three of us were aligned in terms of, we wanted to make this a Kenyan brand that can cross borders at the end of the day and become an international brand. And that was really our vision, and we were very aligned. And that's how we made the decision to then start looking for more, for a fund or other forms of funding to grow. We were really needing the funds, but we were very aware of the fact that we need to choose the right people. At the end, that actually was our biggest concern. We're now going to get into a relationship with new partners who are going to put substantial money into our business. And can we actually work with these people, and what value will they add to our business by bringing them into the business? That became more important for us as we started coming to more finality in terms of who do we choose. And at the end of the day, there were two, yourself and another investor, that were basically ready to sign. And we chose Uqalo because of our belief in them in terms of adding value and us being able to work together. But that doesn't mean the negotiation process was smooth. It was not smooth at all. At some point, me and Seb had to meet at junction just to look each other in the eye and say, hey, guy, this is not going to work. This is definitely not. How do we work together after all this shit you've told me? And Seb would counteract that. And in hindsight, it was actually a very healthy process because we got to know each other better. And we're better for it today as they've come into our business as partners.
I think it also made you, Nathan, and Joram have some real kind of come to Jesus moments as we go into the Easter holiday. Some real, it forced you guys to sit down and have some real serious conversations. I mean, there was a point where the deal almost fell through because the three of you guys started arguing and fighting. And we had to do a sit down at Hemingway's, a whole day, shut ourselves away from everything and do a sit down at Hemingway's to get everyone on the same page again and kind of negotiate, the different egos and pain points at the table. I think also that ended up being good for you. I don't know how you feel about that, but I think in the end, for the three of you guys, it kind of put you guys all on the same page again, going into the next generation of Big Square, the next big push of growth.
I think there are a few things we got wrong, so that led to there was a lot of friction, quite a lot of heat. I think one of the challenges was, as Morne said, he's got two other investors. They weren't as involved in the process as they should have been. They either should have been more involved or more hands off. But they wanted to retain just as much a decision as Morne at the end of the day, but they weren't really close enough to it. Not because they weren't interested, but they're just busy. Nathan doesn't live here. So I think we ended up redoing a lot of the process a couple of times. So we'd agree something with Morne, we thought it was agreed with everyone, and then months later we find not everyone really had given it time and attention. So the term sheet, we spent weeks discussing the term sheet.
I would say months.
Months probably discussing it, and it was a detailed term sheet. And, I know the guys spent a lot of time going through it. But still, 6 months later, as we then get into the documentation, we find out there are some fundamentally differences of views about what the term sheet meant over some really important items. Probably the only thing we had a common understanding of was the price. Many, many other things were just like, well, I didn't know you meant that, or I thought you meant the other. And that was partly because we were negotiating it by email or by phone or in person, but not with everyone in there. So Morne would be there, Jason would be there, but they'd go away and relay the other things. So I think the other thing we got wrong is we probably at that stage both of us should have got legal advisors involved earlier. So Alex from Bowman's advised us, but we probably should have had him at the table then. And I think the team should have had, these Oliver Fowler at Kaplan and Stratton should have had him involved earlier as well. Because some of the other things that really slowed the deal down, I think Alex would have made sure we got under the skin of earlier in the deal. So, there were lots of issues just around property. Obviously, the sites they're in are critical, and we should have had a better understanding or should have asked better questions to understand what the state of all those leases were. And it was one of the first transactions we've done in Kenya, and we really didn't understand how difficult getting leases registered and all these different things were. So Alex had to educate me about that, much later, and then we had to then start going through a process of realization. So I probably should have got Alex involved earlier to make sure that both at the same time we were going through things like building the relationship and understand the economics. We were also going through some of these legal issues. I think just lastly, I'm going to add one last thing. Generally, actually, I really dislike the word deal because it implies something which is transactional. And these transactions are, not transactional. And this is sort of Morne's point around the right people. And, it's not a deal. It's not a transaction. It's about forming a partnership. And, we probably could have spent more time together, both Morne and I, but certainly, Morne's partners and us. And I think in the end, we spent probably enough cumulative hours together, but, we did it over an extended period of time. So, that's something else to sort of just think about, as you're rushing to build a business and rushing to raise some money. It is a partnership. And invest in it as a partnership from that perspective.
Great insights. So during the capital raise process, I know this can get really lonely as an entrepreneur and it can be really, really tough. You're learning new terms, you're working on, legal structures, you're working on contracts, you're thinking about expansion at the same time, you have a team to manage. So Morne, amidst all this stress and pressure, how did you do it?
I've got a friend, his name is Jack Daniels.
That's a good friend.
No, I actually made a couple of notes as I was thinking about the process I went through. And what is it that I can tell other entrepreneurs that are going through their first deal or transaction or partnership, whatever you want to call it? Usually it's not our expertise. We're not legal people. We're dreamers, mostly. So understanding how to put it all together, that's why I said, if we didn't have someone like IDEV helping us, I would have still been looking around. So I made a couple of notes about the lessons I learned through the deal as an entrepreneur. And I think the first one was you need to learn to let go a little bit. As an entrepreneur, this is your baby. And don't mess with my baby. So you need to learn to let go a little bit. And I think I alluded to it earlier on, choosing partners is like getting married. You don't get married to the first person you meet or to the partner with the best performance. Your wife is in the back. Your wife is in the back saying, "Hey." So when you're looking for partners, I think you need to keep that in mind and understand your personality and your dreams and explain that as much as possible. Jason used to keep telling me, "Listen, don't say that. Don't say you want to go to Nigeria next month." So we had to tone it down a little bit, but I think being honest about what you want for the business going forward. And then I think when you're an entrepreneur and you're in a financial spot, you could become quite desperate for cash. And it's easy for me to sit here and say, look, you need to make sure it's the right partner, be patient, but there's some crocodiles chasing you for cash in your business. So trying to stay calm while all of this is going on in the background, and not losing focus and enthusiasm for the deal. So you have to keep on it. Don't give up, because at some point, actually at many points, I thought we'll never sign this deal. It's not going to happen.
You said we'll never sign the deal. Well, you said I'm done.
Yes. So I think being patient and persistent is most probably key ingredient into doing a successful transaction. But it's easier said than done. Mince our words about it. And I think another thing that you need to be very aware of is that when you're bringing institutional investors into your business, they're going to bring a lot of additional processes, procedures, checks, and balances into the business. And it's easy to look at it and say, well, this is negative. and I don't need this, and it's just going to slow me down, and why do they need to know all of this? And I think you need to look at it positively, because at the end of the day, that's how you grow your business from a startup to becoming a bigger business, is exactly putting in those processes, procedures, and that's the real value that Seb and Nim will bring going forward, in addition to others. What I realized after me and Seb's junction discussion was you need to also put yourself in their shoes and try and understand it from their point of view, because they're coming from the outside and they're going to put money into your business, and you need to look at it and say, why is Seb asking me this, and why is he unhappy, or why? Try and understand it and process it, and then move on from there, which is, again, easier said than done, but I think it's an important part of the process. Another thing I learned is don't be scared or afraid to stand your ground. Understand your value and don't stand down as an entrepreneur. Because when all the noise is happening around you, you can sometimes become a little bit desperate to get this thing done. You could most probably shortchange yourself a little bit, and I think it's important to keep that in mind and stay focused on it. Another big realization is that you could leave the company that you've started at some point for yourself, or it's time for you to leave because the business requires a different management style, it requires different skills to what you have. And I think that the earlier you make peace with that, I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but I think you need to keep that in mind, is that as a founder of a business, you might be good at founding a business, but that doesn't mean you can run a $500 million business. And I think you need to be realistic about that. And then, like I said, I think if you're not persistent and patient, it's difficult to be an entrepreneur anyway, because you keep giving up every step of the way. So
there's an interesting opportunity over here, and then over here, and oh, dogs, and oh, Nigeria,
the shiny penny syndrome. You know, things will get tough, and it's also important for you to have a pressure release button, whatever it is. My pressure release button, as I said, is having a drink with friends and spending some time with my family. But I don't think I would have gotten through this process if I didn't talk to some friends who have already been through this. I think that's also critical.
I mean, I think it was good as well around the pressure release to have Jason there, because it was useful for me, to be honest. Times when I need to share some choice words with people, I could go and share them with Jason rather than Morne. So he did very well at absorbing some of my frustrations. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe Jason, you commented on this, but I wonder whether actually, you added more value not in getting the offer, but in actually getting the deal closed, going from offer to close. But I don't know, what are your thoughts and reflections on that?
This is something that I think is really important and was a lesson learned for me, and we said this going in before we went into due diligence, get all the contracts done. So, lots of founders and entrepreneurs do. You're building the business. Nathan and Jordan were pumping money in. There were no contracts signed. We've got a handshake, and we know we're all on the same page. Morne didn't have a final agreement that was ready for the future, etc. And we said, hey, let's get this done before we go to due diligence, and didn't, I think, press firmly enough to make that happen. The second you go to due diligence and the investor is there, now the investor has a seat at the table, and they're not only negotiating the deal, they're negotiating your contract, negotiating your shareholder loan agreements, they're negotiating, because all of that is value, creates value or takes value away from the business. And I think that added a ton of time to the transaction, that going back and forth, and also gets very personal. Like negotiating, the CEO's contract is very personal. It's almost more personal. I don't know if you think so, but it was almost, from my end, it seemed like it was more personal than the entire deal.
Yeah, so I think, if you're raising money broadly, if you can get an advisor, get an advisor. I think it's really valuable, and I see lots of businesses doing it without an advisor, maybe doing it well without an advisor, but certainly my experience would be getting an advisor. I think the other thing is, Churchill's our CFO at Big Square, run finance and admin as if someone might walk in tomorrow and do due diligence on your business. Don't try and catch up in 3, 4, or 5 years of administration. It'll save you a lot of trouble later on.
Wow, those are fantastic insights we are getting from a real-life transaction that recently closed. And something very unique about this panel, you can see each and every one of them played a very key role in ensuring that the deal was successful. Just coming back again to the local context, there's been a lot of narrative about, why local founders are not, as successful or are not being seen to secure international investment. Maybe Morne, do you want to say something about, what you've seen in this market that the local entrepreneurs can borrow from so that they can help build and scale successful businesses?
I think firstly, I'm not sure that's accurate. I know a lot of local entrepreneurs that are raising funds. So I think it's about understanding where you want to take the business very early on as an entrepreneur. If your dream is to scale it, you need to, like Seb has just said, you need to start managing the business from the beginning in readiness for that as well as you can. With the chaos of starting a business, again, that's easier said than done. Usually all your invoices are on a drawer somewhere for the accountant to pick up later. I think
Contracts are in the to-do list.
Contracts on the to-do list. But I think what we did do well is our financial management from the beginning has been fairly tight, which I think really helped in the beginning in terms of getting the deal done. So when we did went through the financial due diligence, the issues that were brought up were not major. I think if I could share some of my experience in terms of growing the business in a local environment is firstly be very clear about what it is you want to do as an entrepreneur. Sometimes we shoot from the hip and we say we want to start this thing. If you're really clear about where you want to take your business or what you want to do with your brand, that should be your guiding light, and whatever else you do should support that dream. Where I think some local entrepreneurs could be doing it for, they start a business because they want their own pocket money, and they don't want to work for someone. So it depends, that's what I'm saying, it depends what your motivation is. There's also nothing wrong with being an entrepreneur that doesn't want to scale his business to 20 countries. I don't see anything wrong with that. And they'll run a small enterprise and they're happy with it. And there's no problem with that. I think it's a good thing.
Maybe from an investor's perspective, Seb, what is it that you look for when you look in a business as an investor?
That's going to be quite generic, Winnie, but, common to everyone, as I mentioned earlier, firstly, you've got to deliver value to your customers. I don't mean value as in it's got to be cheap, but they've got to leave and think, I got a lot out of this. So you've got to have customers that, will be your evangelists who'll go out and say and recommend you, voluntarily. So that's what we're looking for firstly. Companies that got a great value proposition to clients. Businesses, impossible without that. Secondly, a business where, as I mentioned again earlier, the core economics are understood and they're strong. It cost me X million shillings to open a restaurant, and this is the payback, and this is my return on capital. If you're the CEO of a business, you've got to understand what the core economics of your business are. Lastly, looking for people, and this comes back to your point about local entrepreneurs maybe. So we're looking for teams, not individuals. We're looking for teams who've got a good understanding of the main issues. So one is how we operationally going to deliver our service or deliver our products, day in, day out. How can we do that reliably? We're looking for teams that really understand their customer, and I think this is the point where certainly we would never back a business that was a team where they were all non-Kenyan. If your customers are Kenyan and you've got no one in the team who's Kenyan, to think you understand your customer, understand, all of their aspirations and their concerns, and it was hard to get without Kenyans in the team is understanding the customer. And then we're looking for teams who are aligned with us. So at the end of the day, we're trying to build a business, maximize its value, and sell it. That's what we want to do, and if you don't want to do that, then you're not the partner for us. And as Jason said, Morne said, not wanting to do that is perfectly valid, but don't try and compromise yourself.
Morne, your point, there are local founders and local businesses that are raising. They're just much more quiet about it. They raise and then go and don't tell anyone.
I was preferring that myself, really.
Yeah, because then KRA comes knocking and friends come knocking and, you just raised $6.5 million. Hey, where's mine? So I think it's also just slightly different approach. There are those local founder stories. They're just not being told as much as well. So I think there's a number of factors there. Yeah.
Great. I think that's good insight, and we look forward to having more and more entrepreneurs telling their positive story on how they're growing successful businesses. From Metta, EAVCA, and IDEV, we really appreciate you and look forward to hosting you again in the next podcast series.
And thanks to Seb and Morne as well for coming up and sharing their stories.
Thank you very much. so much for listening to our podcast. This podcast is brought to you by IDEV International, Metta, and East Africa Venture Capital Association. Do look out for our next episode. This is Inside the C-Suite series.